I know athletics, and you know it, too, and you see people like in your sport, Mondo Duplantis, right? Whose parent has coached them throughout their career and had success, right? So we see examples of this with the Williams sisters in tennis and people like this, and I'm starting to see it in swimming, where you have parents who are very heavily involved in the athlete's performance. Now there are examples of it where it's highly successful, but I think the majority of it doesn't end up like that. It's not good. So I see a lot of parents that are overly invested and just need to let the coaches coach a little bit more. Because I'll have an athlete come to me and say, "Here's my goal. Here's my expectation. Here's the way I'm going to swim it," and I'll say, "Well, where did you get all that from? Like we didn't talk about that. That's not what I have intended for you." It's like, well, that's what mom wants. It's what dad wants. That's what they told me to do. And there's this back and forward, this struggle between what they want. And then as soon as they get out of the pool, they're not looking at me, they're looking past me to see how their parents are reacting. And then they're spending hours, talking about the race itself. So you know where I'm going with all this is how do you combat that if you can at all?
So first, I think it's important to outline a couple figures on reality, which is if you look at the research, the number one contributor for young athletes for experiencing what we call fear of failure, which is like the things we're talking about, not actually striving for success because we're so afraid of what it'll feel like if we fail, is parents. So parents contribute to that, and it makes sense, right? Because if you have a parent on the sideline who is, putting all this expectation and pressure and so invested in you, what tends to happen is that kid or that athlete tightens up because they feel like, oh my gosh, who wants to let mom or dad down, right? No kid wants to let their mom or dad down, especially if they're like investing this time, energy, money, etc. So let's start with that. It's a problem. Are there exceptions? Absolutely. There's exceptions to everything. But even if you look at some of the greats, like who we use as examples, for instance, Tiger Woods, a couple years ago, he was asked, what would your advice be for a young, star in a sport to parents? And he said, never, he said, and again, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote, but he said, it's got to be them. It's got to be the kid. And he said, and this is Tiger Woods, he said, despite everything you hear, like my dad never like forced me to go play golf. I was asking him to go play golf. I was like that in love with that. And whether you believe him or not, like that's where the data shows as well is for the vast majority of people it's got to be the kid driven and not the parent top down dictating and demanding, because like the parent often causes some negative psychological or mental ramifications from that. So, okay, great. What do you do as a coach? Well, this is tough. No coach, every high school, junior high, club team, even college team I talk to asks this same question because we're all facing it.
Right.
And I think that it starts a couple ways. It starts with, as the coach, I think we've got to do a better job of educating our parents, because they see the Williams sisters or the Mondo and say, I'm going to be that. I want the best for my child. I'm going to be, that dad or mom on the sidelines doing that. And we've got to at least educate them on, okay, what actually tends to help and what actually gets in the way. There was a wonderful study not too many years ago on high level tennis juniors, right? And what they found is they surveyed all the parents and they surveyed all the kids and did all this psychological research. And they asked the kids who are, again, performing at a high level at the junior level, what do you want your parents to know or do during a match? And it was completely different from the expectation the parents had. The parents thought, they wanted them to be involved and to dictate strategy and blah, 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 blah. And the kid essentially wanted them to sit back, support, and like be there no matter what, but not be the coach.
Yeah.
And that educating the parents on like, hey, this is what helps is step one. And then I think step two on that is some parents are going to resist because they're parents. That's fine, whatever. Is then it's your relationship with the kid or the athlete. So as the coach, you can't be the one be like, hey, don't ever listen to mom or dad, right? Because how's that going to go over? But what you can do is be like, okay, you know, that's great. There's your parents' input. But when it comes to swimming, like I'm your coach and I'm like, you came to this club to be a part of this team.
Mm.
And like my job is to impart knowledge that I see based on, working with, dozens and hundreds of other swimmers in developing on my own career at the highest level. And like, I want you to have those opportunities to develop wherever that takes you. And to do that, like, I see it as X, Y, and Z. Like, this is what we need to focus on. And often kids will get it. Now, is that kid going to go back to mom and dad and be like, I'm not going to listen to you anymore? No, they're going to hear the parent, but you as the coach almost have to kind of like be the buffer sometimes. I remember when I was coaching collegiate runners, there was a situation or two where I had some, again, parents who love their kids and were wonderful, but like just put too much on their kid.
Yeah.
And I could tell it because that athlete, whenever their kid was in the stands, that athlete would choke. And I remember having to, have a conversation with a couple of kids and be like, hey, is this pressure coming from mom or dad? And they'd be like, yeah, I feel good until, pre-race, like mom or dad comes up and starts talking to me. And then I feel like my physiological arousal goes from like excited but under control to just like fear and anxious, right? Anxiety.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, okay, got it. And as a coach, what I have to do, I had to essentially be the buffer, right? So I'd be like, okay, you're going to, little Susie, Johnny, you're going to go warm up and do this stuff. And I'd be kind of on the outlook, looking out for the parents. And I'd be like, hey, I'd intercept. And I'd be like, hey, Jim, like, Susie's warming up right now. Like, let's come back later. Can you talk to her after the race? She's kind of getting in the zone. And you just have to find creative ways to like be that buffer for that kid so that they don't feel the brunt of it, especially at a younger age.
Yeah, for sure. We had parents on the sideline across the whole pool from various teams, but like on the side of the pool, like right in front where the kids turned, like screaming at their children on the weekend. Like I've never met anyone, certainly not myself either, where I've thought to myself, oh, my mom is screaming so hard right now. I need to try harder. I need to swim faster. Like why are you screaming at your child? Almost to the point where a couple of parents almost fell in the pool. Like they were yelling so hard at their kid. I'm like, that does nothing. It does zero. Your kid is not trying harder. They're not swimming faster. They're not looking at you thinking, wow, my mom looks really cool right now with a bright red face almost falling in the pool. It's just madness to me.
It is, but it is. I think it's just part of the culture, especially in youth sports, especially in America. And I think what happens is those moms or dads, they want the best for their kid. And then they see these other parents doing this crazy stuff. And then it just becomes normalized.
Right.
And often what happens is it makes that parent feel like I'm doing something. Like
Right.
Look at how hard I'm yelling for my child. They must,
Right.
I must be a good parent. And it's hard to combat that stuff, but like we've got to do the best that we can.
Yep.
And sometimes that means addressing with the parent, but sometimes that means, buffering it with that kid and being the kind of voice of sanity and reality over on the other side.